Okay. So I would say good afternoon, but it's good morning for many Canadians and people from Chile and South America and US. You are welcome to this webinar. Today we have I have the pleasure to welcome Jason Little, which is the founder of Lean Change Management. And please, Jason, if you can introduce yourself and your topic.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for having me today. So I'll start with the topic. So today I'm going to chat about what my experience has been using pathways and digital credentials over, I guess, what I would call just traditional certifications. So a little bit about myself. So author of a couple of books. Actually, this is the longest stretch where I haven't been back to Finland. I've been to Finland, I don't know, 20 times over the last 10 years or so, probably a little bit more. But with COVID, it's been quite a while that I've been able to get back. I started my career as a developer in the 90s. So if anybody's technical and they remember something called Cold Fusion, that was the first programming language that I started with. And then I got into what's called agile coaching and consulting in the mid 2000s or so. So helping organizations adopt agile practices in a variety of capacities. So working as an external consultant, an internal coach, a product owner, scrum master, pretty much everything across the board. I also teach an agile methodologies course at Sheridan College, where I live very close to. And a couple of other things there as well that I don't really need to get into, but my attraction to digital credentials was that it doesn't follow a linear path. I mean, knowledge work is so different than it used to be. You know, my first job as a programmer, I was on a team where there were 5 of us on the web development team. And now the 5 of us, we've basically been replaced by WordPress and like 50% of a marketing person's time, because technology and how free information is nowadays, tools, AI, those types of things has made it easier, where over specialization in one area is kind of less important than it used to be. And coming into this from, I guess, the agile space, one of the interesting things about how agile training companies have approached this problem is using certification language that's not even close to being as rigorous as it has been in traditional industries. And what I mean by that is you sit in a 2-day class, you're certified in something. And if you look at the rigor behind, say, getting your PMP, there's a lot more rigor behind that you have to go through as far as learning and tests and validation and things like that. So in the agile space, you know, this goes back to the mid 2000s, there's always been a bit of a, are certifications useful or not debate. And then there's kind of the camp that absolutely hates them and think it's the root of all evil in the world. And there's others that think, well, everybody's got to eat, so it's a necessary evil, and we're just going to jump on that bandwagon anyway, because it's easier for us to sell stuff to people if we attach a certification to it. So instead of talking about that debate, because I'm sort of, you know, live and let live, do whatever you want, it really makes no difference to me, I wanted to just describe why we chose to go a different route, and what we ended up doing and what we've learned and what is next for us. So the interesting thing is my oldest is going to be heading off to post-secondary probably in the fall, and this is what her journey looks like to become certified in auto body and collision. 12 weeks learning, then a year-long apprenticeship, another 12 weeks back in school, and then another year of apprenticeship. Repeat that 3 times. So it's kind of interesting that in that world, the on-the-job training, even just to get certified, you can't just go and do it. You've got to go and prove yourself on the job. You've got to get experience. You have to get a mentor. You need to get a sponsoring company. So you actually have to go out and find a company who's going to sponsor you into a program before you can actually even take the qualification test to get that. But it's interesting that if you want to become certified in organizational leadership, you can sit in a class for 2 days. And this is one of the main problems that I've seen with, the kind of again, coming from the Agile space, is it's a gold rush to sell 2-day training courses. So as an example, when I took my certified Scrum Master in the mid 2000s, it was like $2,500 to get that. There was no test. So you just sit there and you get it. Now there's people on LinkedIn selling certified Scrum Master courses for $100, right? The market's been so oversaturated, and every training organization comes out with certification language, but the criteria is different, right? Like if you look at the auto body program, there's a governing body that decides what those credentials look like. They decide the rigor, they decide, actually, Lenora, when we get to the questions, you've probably got a lot of information about the rigor in creating those processes and creating those credentials and how those programs work. And none of that exists in the Agile space. Basically somebody in their basement can just come up with certification language. And if they're really good at marketing, and that's it. So it sort of watered down the playing field in the Agile space, at least. If you Google Scrum certifications, you'll probably find 50 companies that offer it. And you can take a class anywhere from $50 up to, $2,000. And it's all going to be a little bit different. So that's one of the main reasons why we wanted to try something different, is not just to be another Me Too. Hey, look, we can do this too kind of thing. So this was funny. This was Scott has always been in the camp that I mentioned that is very much against certification in the Agile space, or the language. And this was something he said at a panel. They were discussing kind of the pros and cons and the merits of it. And this is sort of what the Agile community largely has evolved to, as long as you're basically just paying for it, right? And most of these organizations, they say the certification is up to the discretion of the trainer. So there isn't firm criteria. There might be like a 20-question multiple choice attached on the end of it. But largely, if you can pay for it, you're all set. And of course, that's where the money is, right? Like according to this research and markets study, I think I have a link in the notes, but it's behind a paywall. This is the value of the IT certification industry. So it's grown exponentially, and it's going to continue to grow based on their estimates as we keep flooding the market with more and more of these different types of certifications. So everybody wants a chunk of that, right? Which is understandable. But the big deal for me is knowledge work learning today is largely free. There is so much, MIT, Harvard, Yale, they all have lots of free courses that you can take, Wikipedia, everything on the internet. I think it's safe to say that knowledge today is largely free, and it's much easier to access than it used to be. It used to be you would have to go the university route and take a 4-year degree because there was no other options back then. But today there's plenty of options. There's tons of different training courses. There's tons of online universities. Language isn't a barrier anymore with how technology has made it easy to communicate with people in different languages. But the knowledge is largely free. And a lot of these certifications, they talk about standards. How do we standardize the learning experience, and how do we ensure that we can validate people have the same level of knowledge and experience? And it's just impossible because humans we're not robots, right? When I was working in IT, back in the 90s, the Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer was the big certification that existed back then. And I would work with people who had that credential who didn't even know how file sharing worked. They were just good at passing tests. And that's, like I said, I don't really care. If you like them, go after them. It doesn't matter. But this is why we chose not to, because it doesn't really validate anything. And it creates what I've seen in the Agile space is the race to the bottom, and it dumbs down our profession, right? Think of, if you're a CEO in a Fortune 50 company, are you really going to listen to somebody who became certified in leadership in a 2-day course online? as opposed to if you look at MIT or Emeritus or some of these other organizational development and change and leadership courses that are much more intensive and longer, they don't even offer certifications. They offer certificate of completions, which I find interesting. So this was actually the professor of one of the courses that I took. He said, leadership is so contextual. You know, Agile jumped all over the leadership space maybe 5-6 years ago. They started offering certified Agile leadership, and then every Agile training outfit kind of jumped on that same bandwagon and started offering that. And in his view, it's so contextual. You can't apply the same thing in every organization. You can't standardize leadership. You can't create a set of criteria that says somebody is certified and not certified. And like I said, they don't offer those at all. They offer a certificate of completion, which is basically you've shown enough evidence, you've done the simulation, you've done the exit interviews, you've done these things to show that you've successfully completed it. Now, whether you could actually go in an organization and lead is a totally different story. So they don't use that language. So what we ended up doing instead was using digital credentials and using different categories that would send people on missions instead. Like I said, knowledge is pretty easy to acquire these days. So we have 4 levels of our credentials that we started with, and the green is knowledge. So all of our courses we've got about 15 different knowledge level badges, depending on what you do. And there's different levels within those knowledge badges as well. So for example, if you take the self-study version of our course on your own, you get a knowledge-based badge, but the ribbon color is a little bit different. So it differentiates it from people who've actually been in a 2-day course, because I think if you're in a course with your peers, the learning experience is going to be, it's going to be better. It's going to be deeper. So you should get a more prestigious credential, if you will, if you've done that, as opposed to the self-study. So, and then we move up to application. So all of our badges are based on following Bloom's taxonomy. So when all of these were created, the application level badges are, you need to show me evidence of the practices, the tools, and the ideas that you've tried from what you've learned, but you don't have to go to our training course. You know, some people who've used our change canvases or perspective mapping or some of our other organizational change tools, we want the story, we want pictures, and we want evidence. So you need to tell us a story. You need to do a 15-minute on-air interview with us where we can ask questions, and a follow-up webinar where people can ask you questions. Pictures, if you can use them. So we want to make sure everything is safe. We don't want to publish any, you know, sensitive information out there. And stories from 3 people that validate your experience. And the difference with the approach that we take is, you know, you see all these wild success stories and case studies on LinkedIn, and I think we all know those are sprinkled with, you know, a little bit of pixie dust. We don't want an over-the-top success story. We want to know when you were in the trenches doing change on a reorg where you're laying off 1,000 people and you use some of our tools, that's hard to do. How did you do it? Why did you choose our tools, and what happened? So it doesn't have to be a rousing success story. We just want to see your experience. Now, the more of these experience badges that you collect, you can get to a point where you can now teach the class. So you can't just become a trainer in our ecosystem if you haven't used these ideas. And that's one of the things that I think differentiates us from some of the competitors. If you want to give them money, they'll give you a license to sell their courses and teach their stuff. I want to make sure that people have actually done it, where they've got some experience, they have some knowledge, then they can go ahead and teach people how to do it. And then within that licensed facilitator collection of badges, there's things like, you know, trainers get their first workshop micro credential when they've run their first course, when they've run their 10th course, other little things that they've done, because every time one of our trainers, actually Jorge, who's on the call, is one of our trainers as well, you know, they're promoting our ideas in our ecosystem. And then the blue badges are people that help advance the ideas. So I think the Lean Change book's been translated into 5 languages, and right now it's pending in Persian and Turkish and Japanese. I believe. And these folks do this on their own time, right? Somebody will email me and say, hey, I've got a big audience in Japan. We want to translate the book. Can we do that? Awesome. So the translators and the people who review it and dedicate their time, they get an ambassador badge because they're advancing these ideas around the world. So we just tried to do something that is so people can showcase things that they've done and experience that they have and stories they've told. So within each of these 4 different colors, there's multiple badges, and it's not a linear progression. So there's some people who have ambassador badges. They've never come to a course. They don't teach it. They haven't applied the ideas, but maybe they've done a research project for us. Or maybe they've translated, or they've reviewed a book, or they've hosted meetups, 10 meetups based on the ideas. So why shouldn't they get something as well? They shouldn't have to pay to sit in a 2-day course just to get some validation that they're an early adopter or an innovator or something like that. So that's the way we set them up. And we set them up so they're not linear. So like I said, right, if you have earned your storyteller credential, doesn't necessarily mean you've attended a course. I don't know, maybe there's folks on the call that you would much rather take an idea and go try it first. You're kind of biased more towards action. You're just, yeah, give me the idea, let me go try it. And then maybe a couple of years down the road, you might go to a training session to kind of fill in the missing pieces. But we don't require people to have to take a knowledge-based class before they can try these ideas. So we offer a community and a bunch of resources and free tools and stuff that anybody can use. And then they can choose, do you want to go, say, for example, you want to collect a certain number of modules. All of our courses are basically modular based. So the path to earning that credential is highlighted with, once you've taken these 7 modules, you've earned this credential. This is a change that we're kind of in the middle of rolling out right now. So I've always thought this idea of a 2-day, 3-day class, which this is far and away the most popular thing in the Agile space, is not the most effective way to learn. I've been running mine normally spread out over a period of time. So they'll take these 7 modules over 7 different sessions. And with each class, it depends on what their preference is. So when I run private classes, a lot of the times what they want to do is they kind of want learning and application rolled into their class. So they want like a 12-week program where let's do a session, and then over the 2 weeks, you're going to go back into your organization and you're going to apply what you learned from that first session. Then you're going to come back for the second one. We'll do a little review on what happened, help and support you through it. Kind of that same model of how apprenticeship works in skilled trades, where you're learning a bit and then you go out and you try it, and then you come back and you learn a little bit more. And the feedback from that is that in private classes, definitely, and mostly in the public ones too, people prefer that learning style because they're not just trying to cram all the knowledge into their head in 2 days and then they go back to work and they forget everything. So they kind of like that stretched out version of it. And it makes learning more on demand and asynchronous. So the pathways that we have is trying to help people figure out, well, what are your goals? The lean change, we're about organizational change. That's what we do. We help people try to find the right approach to help them help their organizations change. And that can mean different things. That might mean change agents that are working in HR that are trying to roll out some global HR policy. That might mean a digital transformation or an agile transformation. So if you want to specialize in agile transformations, this is the pathway that would be a good idea for you to follow, because those knowledge-based credentials are all based in agility. And if you don't work in an agile company, or you're not interested in the agile stuff, but you're interested in a more modern change toolkit, then take the foundations course and follow the path of a few of these application-based badges instead. So we try to customize the pathways and the learning depending on where people want to go, because our audience has always been quite diverse. We'll get people coming from I guess what I would call the traditional change management space. So they may have been introduced to, older change ideas in the 90s or early 2000s that haven't really evolved much. And they're getting kind of thrown into this. We want to do change faster. They don't know anything about Agile. They don't know anything about lean startup. So it wouldn't really make a lot of sense for them to go down the Agile transformation path. So it kind of helps steer them into what might make the most sense for them in their context. So what we did is we started with certificates of completion. So right from the get-go, we never used the certification language. And that was more just my own personal bias, where I didn't think it was reasonable to certify anybody for sitting in a 2-day course, regardless of the topic. It's just my personal preference. And like I said, if that's the thing you like, go for it. I don't really care. That's just not my preference. So people who would attend the class, they get a certificate of completion to say you stayed awake for 2 days. Since then, we've had just over 11,000 learners, and we introduced the digital credential program in 2018. I think it was 2018, might have been 2019. You'd probably know, Eric, because I've been using your platform since then. So, since then, that's the number of credentials that we've issued. And then people who attended our workshops kind of pre 2018 or 19, when we started issuing them, they can get them on demand. So they'll say, hey, I came to your class in 2015. Can I get my badge? And that's all automated because I've built all the integration with the OBF platform. So it's largely self-serve. People can come back and get those types of things. Depending on the type of credential that's being issued, some are automatic and some are manual. So the platform that we use for people to attend our workshops, they automatically get a knowledge-based credential. So when the trainers mark them as successfully participating in it, that fires off their badge automatically. But if they want to apply for, say, a storyteller or an application-based badge, there's a form that they need to fill out. And it basically, they tell us a little description of the story. The form tells them what we need from them. So, you need to do a 15-minute on air. You need to provide 3 testimonials from people, and these, that, and the other. They submit that form, and then we deal with those kind of in a case-by-case basis. Obviously, the facilitator badges are automatic, and the ambassador ones are semi-automatic, I guess. Mostly manual though, because these are people that will just email us out of the blue and say, hey, here's actually the person who first translated the book in Spanish just did it on their own and sent me the whole thing. Said he was a retired professor. He liked the ideas and he said, here you go, do whatever you want with it. Use it, don't use it, but it was done. And I was like, oh, awesome. So then, he got his translator badge for doing that, which was awesome. So that was the approach that we took. And here's some of the interesting stats. Far and away, LinkedIn's the most popular platform for the sharing of badges. So we track where they get shared to. I think Twitter and Facebook were basically split. So, 5 to 6% of the shares to Twitter, 5 to 6 on Facebook. But I would say my audience is 90% of my audience. LinkedIn is their social media of choice. Twitter's probably the lowest. Vast majority obviously are knowledge-based because the knowledge-based ones are the easiest to obtain. And the interesting thing, there seems to be a preference based on region. What I've noticed is, North Americans tend to share the digital credential, the badge, because we also still do PDF certificates of completion, because some people need to print those out and hand it into HR to get reimbursed for the course and that kind of stuff. But the South Americans tend to share the PDF certificate instead. The folks in Europe seem to not really care either way. They're there for the learning. They could care less if you give them like a Twix bar or a badge or whatever. I find that they really when you compare it to North America is very much focused on certifications and credentials. Can I get PDUs for this? Can I get CDUs for this? What certification do I have? I'm not coming to your class unless I get a certification. And in Europe, it seems to be just the total opposite. They seem to come to the courses just for the experience of the learning. And most of them, like, they don't even collect their badges after they get them because they don't really care. The application-based credentials, those, the uptick of those has been slow because they're harder to get, right? People have to dedicate time. So if you want to apply for our storyteller badge or one of our application badges, it's probably a day of your time in total to do that, because you've got to write your little story, which we'll ghost write it for you on Zoom, or even now you can just use AI to write it for you. You've got to be available for a 15-minute interview. You've got to get testimonials from people. That third one is usually the kicking point, because people, they'll have the story, they'll do the interview, but they can't get any evidence from people. They can't get validation from people in the company that they've done this. And that's usually the point where a lot of the applications get stuck. And for us, that's perfect. On the negative side, it kind of hurts growth, obviously. On the positive side, it validates that it actually is a right story. Because I think, like I said earlier, we know all this stuff you see on LinkedIn about, look, I ran this fantastic week-long learning event and we got all these benefits. I know we know those are all, there's a little bit of marketing behind that. People really want pathways. Most of the support questions that we get through the chat are, what's the difference between that course and that course? I'm an enterprise change agent in financial services. We're going through a digital transformation. Which of your courses would be best for me? Or where should I go to learn? And we're not good at that. I'll admit our pathways kind of suck right now. That's what we're working on next to evolve, to make it a little more clear and a little more automated. So we've got some prototypes that are, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure little micro app within our website. So you can feed it some information and it will spit out things. We do have our pathways set up, whereas you can't earn a certain badge unless you've earned a previous one first. So there are some dependencies in there as well, but it's not entirely clear, I would say. And then the micro on-demand learning seems to be what people like the most about this ecosystem that we set up. And what I mean by that is we get kind of like a dolphin approach to engagement. People come to us, and they dive in the water, they take the training course, they go back up to the surface, they'll come back in a few months and say, I took your training course a few months ago and I tried this and I got stuck. What can I do next? So they always seem to be coming back for an engagement when they're in a situation that they're stuck and they need to get unstuck. And then we can help them with that, with the community. So the biggest challenges that we've had with the credentials is more around all of the services and experience around the learning, because learning is just like the one small first thing. But it's supporting people through it, supporting change agents who are working on, massive global reorgs or multi-year transformation programs, or one organization actually in the Nordics, it was a multi-generational transformation. So the CEO is very transparent that we're all going to be retired before this transformation is quote unquote done, because it'll never be done. So their approach to transformation was so totally different. I was in and out of there for 3 years, kind of like the dolphin approach, coming back in to intervene, doing some training, coming back in, doing some application-based stuff, etc. But that's been one of the biggest challenges, and not to cave into the just offering a certification for the sake of offering it. Yeah, we've had people that have just flat out taken our content and they use it in their own certification courses, which for me is kind of good marketing, because it shows the kind of people they are, and people always end up coming back to us, right? The third one's been the toughest one, because depending on the niche that you're trying to go into, if you're going to take, and this seems to be contextual based on country as well. So, we did a little test of, we can offer an IC Agile certification for this course. If you don't want to offer the IC Agile certification, you can use the same content and offer a non-IC Agile certified version of the same material. And what do you think people opt into? The one that has the IC Agile one, and that depends on the region that they're in. So it's like, how do you balance staying true to your values, trying to focus on customer experience and engagement, and not caving in to just the industry norms to make a few bucks? I know that's a harsh way to say it. And then the last challenge is the learning paths, because it's so personal. The change space is such an interesting space, because you get people who are life coaches, you get people that are executive coaches, you get software developers, you get traditional change people, HR people, managers. There's such a broad, diverse set of folks that come into the change space. The learning paths can get very complicated. A software developer who wants to start doing agile coaching or change work, they might need a little bit more on people and change, for example, or conflict resolution, or some of those other types of things. Whereas a traditional change person already knows all that stuff. They don't need any of that out of their course. They just need, maybe they want to learn a little bit about Agile and how I can apply Agile to change. So that it's been a challenge to try to figure out how to structure these pathways the right way. The things that we learned is, it really doesn't matter what we say. People are going to call it a certification anyway. I see this all the time over LinkedIn. I earned a new lean change certification. I'm like, great. Can you tell me what it is? Because we don't offer one. But obviously I don't say that. It's just funny to me that it's the default language that gets used no matter what. And if it makes people feel good, like I said, go for it. But our official stance is we offer certificates of completion, and we offer categories of digital credentials. Vast majority of people care about the experience, right? We've had people come to our classes from competitors and they say, I can't believe you didn't just sit there and read me slides for 2 days. So we really focus on experiential learning and support after the fact. So people who take courses, they kind of get into the inner circle. So they get into our private community, they get into our private Slack, we help them with their problems. But that's the engagement and the learning experience is what most people want. We do get the occasional certification chaser. You've probably seen these on LinkedIn where there's 47 things at the end of their name. Awesome. If that's what you like, go for it. They want to do the bare minimum just to get another acronym at the end. And we run into, the Walmart of certification vendors in the Agile space. And it's, the weird thing is, like I mentioned earlier, is there's no criteria around it. Like there's no governing body that decides, here's the learning objectives that need to be taught for this particular credential. IC Agile is pretty close, but they won't even, if you want to pay to be a member, they're not going to say no. They're going to take your money even if you just read slides to people. So those places are always going to exist. The pro and anti certification debate is never going to end. There's always going to be people. Oh, can we mute? There we go. And I've seen this, I've been in the Agile space for almost 20 years, and I've seen this. I've seen the people who go on the anti-certification rants. Eventually they cave in because money talks more than anything else, right? You'll find that the more people who keep reinforcing this race to the bottom mentality, the Scrum Master course that I took, when I took it, it was 3 days. Now it's 2 days. I'm sure eventually it'll be 1 day, and the barrier just keeps dropping lower and lower and lower because the competition keeps increasing and increasing, and people are competing on price more so than anything else. And this isn't a problem in other industries that have, like I said, in the skilled trades industry, They don't have this race to the bottom mentality, right? There's more rigor, there's more apprenticeship, which means it's a higher cost. And in the agile space, can you really think of who's going to pay for an apprentice to work on a 3-year transformation program to upskill somebody who just took a training course? Probably nobody, right? The shift I've seen in the agile space, at least, is back when I was doing it, it was all consultant based. It was, you're paying somebody anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 a day for agile consulting services. Now, most of the companies I see, they want it in-house. They want employees who are getting paid much less to do transformation work. So the whole thing is kind of just shifting from what I've seen. But the biggest thing that we learned is there's no desire to be the biggest change management training and certification body at all from us. We really want to focus on the part of the change market where the change agents are in it because they love helping organizations change. They love helping people try to make sense of their context, and they like solving problems, and they're curious. That's where we want to focus on. People that really want to leave the world better than how they found it. And most of, if not all of the people who come through our ecosystem kind of fit that mold. So I'll guarantee that we're leaving money on the table, or we're losing customers because we don't offer the language, but those probably aren't the right customers for us anyway. Because it's just a different vibe and approach that we take. So what are we working on next? So this is the wrap up, and I see a bunch of questions have come in through the chat. So I can start poking through those as we go. So for the application-based credentials, we're starting drop-in sessions soon. So basically at a regular cadence, every Friday is our experimenter digital credential. So you need to attend 2 of those sessions. The first one is you have to help set the context about the change experiment that you want to run. We'll help you craft that experiment. You'll go back in your organization and you'll try it. And whenever you've run it, you can drop back in another session and you tell us the story. And that's your evidence. So we're shifting to more towards those drop-in. And this will be for all of our application-based badges as well. I experimented with a few of those sessions over mid to end last year, but as a cohort. So it would be 5 sessions. And the 5 sessions was a little bit too much because the people who come to those sessions, they're ready to experiment. And some people came to those sessions expecting it to be a training course, like I'm going to learn how to use these techniques. So this is going to help us make it more clear that if you want to jump into these sessions, you need to be ready to do this in your organization, because we're not going to teach you the ideas. We're going to kind of coach you through applying them. So you need a real problem to work on. We're in the middle of shifting to the fully modular based learning delivery. And then enhancing all the services around the learning experience itself. So our platform, we've got everybody who comes into our ecosystem adds their change challenge. And that's basically, tell me the problem that you have with doing change right now. And as they go through the knowledge-based events, they add their aha moments. So what was something that stuck out as being the most useful and why? All of these things can be voted on and commented on. So all the good ideas are going to start to float their way to the top, and it's going to build, I like to call it Tinder for change agents as our platform, because whatever problem you're having in your organization right now, there's 100% guarantee somebody somewhere in the world has solved it. So we want to help you find that person through this entire ecosystem. So not just make it about, the learning and the certification and the training, but make it about, helping you love change work again, because it's hard, right? Like being a change agent or a change manager it's difficult work. It's stressful. You usually have no authority or no direct control over anything. You're kind of stuck in the middle between people who want the change and people who don't want the change, and it can be kind of lonely and frustrating. So we want to provide more around that ecosystem, and the learning is just the one small part, but the missions are really where it's at. So go try it, tell the story. You're going to inspire somebody else. They're going to try it. They're going to tell two friends. And then hopefully we're all going to leave the world better than how we found it. So that was the main points that I wanted to go through. I was just going to peek into some of these questions. So Julie, is there any recognition of prior learning for any of the badges? Not officially. Usually it is, if you're going to take one of our advanced courses, I'm usually very upfront about, if you don't have this experience or you haven't maybe taken some of these types of courses, you're probably going to feel lost. So our foundations courses are usually the ones to start with, but we don't have any official recognition for that yet. What other questions? So from Cheryl, are you seeing anything interesting in the analytics from these credentials that you didn't have before? So just the stats that I mentioned, I think would be the thing that was interesting, is the knowledge-based ones are the most popular because they have the less friction, right? You don't need to dedicate time to do an interview and case studies and questions and things like that. I guess you can pop in and say if and follow up if you've got something else to add for that question. Or
yeah, I guess I'm just looking for I hate to use ROI, but people now, especially before digital wallets come online, I think in a big way, I think I'm just looking for examples when people find something in the data they didn't have before that compels them to use it almost like a feedback loop. You mentioned that you have a very diverse customer base. So I wondered, is that helping you see different markets or understanding strange new markets that you didn't know existed before?
Yeah, I think the it's almost like different cohorts of people. You know, there's, I would say, the more traditional change people want to add it on their LinkedIn profile. So they're sharing that, you know, LinkedIn has that credential section where you can add courses and things that you've took. So we've got that built and integrated as well. And I would say that cohort, they like the status of it, right? They like the status of having the badge on their, in their credential section on their LinkedIn profile. And then, you know, the people who go after the application ones just love telling stories and they want people to learn from their experiences. And they're the hardest, I find they're the hardest to get that finished because they're in the trenches doing change work all the time. Like they're not LinkedIn users. They don't go on social media. They don't have a blog. They don't tell their stories, but they're just kick-ass change people. And I know them because I usually know them either personally or they've come through the ecosystem somewhere. So trying to get those real authentic stories is challenging. So there's a lot of unfinished applications, I guess. And it's so different from group of people to group of people. But I would say the main thing the analytics said was the knowledge-based ones are the easiest and therefore the most popular. Don's question. So the first one, do you also customize implementations as contract training? Do you want to say more about that?
If I were to say there's continuing education, which is like a B2C, whereas contract training would be more like B2B. You work with a company and you maybe you end up credentialing some of the people, but it's based on a custom program. Do you actually do that, or?
We have a catch-all custom credential or custom workshop basically for those types of things, but it's generally the same as the public ones. When I do the contract training, it usually becomes half consulting, half training. So they're getting the same digital credential for the knowledge-based course, but we're going much deeper into their actual context, but nothing completely separated. The Latin American market appears to be more very engaged. Thoughts about that? Well, Jorge, you could chime in there. But in 2014, when I first started doing this, Germany was the #1 market. So they were the early adopter market. I was back and forth to Germany a bunch of times. And then Australia picked up. Australia has always been a huge market for this. For these ideas, and South America now is South America and Australia are probably tied for #1, I would say. And Jorge, you can validate this, but I think there is such a strong love of change and wanting to help in I guess a lot of the sessions I've attended in South America, we talk a lot about power distance index, which, meaning there's more of a following of the hierarchy as opposed to, say, the Nordics, where it's a very low power distance index. So it's more collaborative with change. Like there's less of that challenge there. I've seen just lots of energy in Latin America about wanting to do change differently, as opposed to the old way of taking 6 months to plan it and then rolling it out and then creating risk mitigation things and all these types of things. They're really getting kind of pushed into wanting to do change more efficiently and quicker and more co-creative.
Yeah, here in South America, I think that the PMO role is still the leader in general of the project. So change management usually has to follow the guidelines from PMO. So very structured with specific plans, milestones, key activities, etc. And so the space to experiment or try to do the things different is still a big challenge. And also what you mentioned related with the authority, with the hierarchy. Our culture in general in South America is still very hierarchy. The hierarchy is too strong. The leaders, the formal leaders, they have a lot of power. So if they support the change, you are in the best of the scenarios, but that doesn't happen usually. So that's why we are experimenting with these new approaches and trying to do the things in a different way to get more achieves and different results. So yeah, it's correct, your appreciation.
Cool. And that's why my Spanish is so poor, because I try to I've jumped into a lot of Jorge's sessions. We do lean copy sessions at the end of it, and I've been trying to learn Spanish for a while. It just keeps getting pushed down the priority list. So demand for master certificates versus certifications. I haven't seen it for my stuff, How much of these individualized experiential lean change stories end up in the badge? Is that important to people? So all the application ones have to have a story. Everybody likes stories. The feedback we always get is I never thought of that. I'm going to give that a try. Or even when I do workshops, people are I think the best comment that I had from somebody was, I didn't like the instructor at all. I learned more from the people in my working group than I did from him. And I was like, that's exactly, that's the whole point. is I can only give you the knowledge, but people will listen to the people around them and their stories as validation. And me as the outside trainer, it's just like, oh yeah, that sounds great, trainer person, but that'll never work here because. But when they hear a peer say it in a similar environment, if they also work in a bank or insurance or whatever, they love that. They love the stories. And that's really what I focus on. Any other questions? So I think just the last was the comment from Don around the trades. Yeah, trades are regulated and agile stuff is not. And maybe it shouldn't be, right? Like, I know it probably sounded like I was complaining a lot about certifications. It's not the intent. I just choose not to do them, right? So we've all got a choice, but I'm choosing not to contribute to the watering down of education and our profession by doing something a little bit different for folks. And I think that was it for the questions. I don't know if anyone else has any that they wanted to either unmute and add some comments or questions before I think we're getting close to the end. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, Jason, do you use batch applications in the Pamash factory?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Sorry.
actually had a question about that because I've been looking to your site and seeing a lot of those badge applications, but some of them I find it interesting that you have a page where you ask people to apply. Some of them are badge applications, but others they generate an email.
Yep.
Which I thought was interesting because
Yes.
it's kind of the same. So in these cases, you don't you do an ad hoc kind of thing. Is
Yes.
that what you're looking? Okay.
Yeah. Because some of them are just we haven't built the application for some.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the other part is wanting it to be more of an interactive experience, right? Like when I did my my certified Scrum practitioner, which was you write a 2-page letter.
Mm-hmm.
And then, in 10 seconds, you submit the letter and they go, great, here's your practitioner status. And I'm like, isn't somebody going to read this? Shouldn't this be validated somehow? So that's why some of them are just a mail to link. So I don't want to put a 50-page form up there. And I want that conversation.
Right. If you have
validation.
small numbers.
Yes. Yeah. And once we create the problem of large numbers, great. Then we'll figure something else out. Yeah. Justin's question, when you contract, do you ever incorporate the application badges into the projects? Not yet, but that's an awesome idea. I'm going to write that down. Cool.
Jason, this is Lenora. I can't disagree with anything that you said. And nor did I expect to or want to, since I'm a radical liberal in my own world. When you were talking about the complexity of the learning path, one of the things I was thinking about was that you might have a recommended one, but it's kind of drop in and drop out. You would say, here are these 10 things you might consider. It's up to you as to how you navigate it, whether you do it or not. But perhaps a self-assessment up front would help people. And then you don't have to model all of the different learning paths and make it as complex as it needs to be. And what I also find is it doesn't help people to have no learning paths. If you just give them the entire library that's available to them, they really do want some guidance.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good idea. I would say the closest we have with the guidance is the knowledge-based classes. There's a standard post-workshop email that says, it's a drip campaign. So after 2 weeks, you get an email, and then 2 weeks later, you get another one that says, hey, have you tried anything from the course? You could check out our storyteller badge and tell us your story, but nothing explicit. That's been something that we have not been good at, for sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Google has a nice model for its learning paths and its certifications, where it's like what I told you, and it's similar to what you have in a way, in that there are skill-based events that are part of the path as well, and you do get some form of digital recognition for each part of the path, but you kind of dip in and dip out depending on what your needs are.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I'm going to check that out too. Cool. I think we're 1 minute over time, so.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Thank you, Jason, for this inspiring. I really would say inspiring, because it's for me it was a bit discovering a new field that I didn't know so much about a field, but the fact that you are really using, I would say, badges, not for certification, but for really recognizing different kind of activities and reflection and learning, which is and I understand that it's a difficult, I would say, sector, but you have competitors with certification as a way to make money, to make business. So it's yeah, it's a, I would say, a big statement, basically.
Capitalism, baby.
Yeah. I end this recording now.